I've come to the realization that the most thirsted over female character in Western gaming right now is a bug. Okay, I am kind of joking, but not really. This past week, I was doing some late night scrolling and I somehow ended up on Silksong TikTok. And listen, I knew this was a popular game, but the sheer amount of content is crazy. There's fan animations, gorgeous art, elaborate cosplays, including what I am personally dubbing Hot Hornet, and I just kept scrolling and it hit me. I have seen more celebration of Hornet over the last week than I have for any recent Western AAA female character in months. And we are talking about characters backed by massive budgets, huge studios, marketing campaigns, the works. Here I am watching all of this bug love, and then I hop over to X to just see people having the same old argument about whether or not gamers even like female characters. And I realized something again. The proof isn't in these people's arguments at all. It is in what fans are actually doing, what they are organically creating, what they are celebrating, where they are spending their time and money. That gap between the response to this indie bug versus these modern female protagonists, that kind of tells us everything that we need to know. If an indie studio of 3 people can figure this out with a fraction of the resources, why do studios with hundreds of millions of dollars keep getting their female characters so wrong? 6 months ago, this was the flagship topic that I began my YouTube journey with, and during that time, I have learned new things and there has been developments in the industry, but to give a quick recap, for years now, it seems like there is a blueprint that has been passed around to some of these Western AAA studios, and once you see the pattern, you can't really unsee it. Female characters that are typically emotionally guarded. They have more masculine traits, a desaturated color palette, underlying frustration, sarcasm, or bitterness, a difficult past that explains why she can't show much warmth or any softer characteristics. And when these personality traits become a checklist, when these female characters all start to follow the same pattern, it has a ripple effect. Let me show you what I mean. Quick thing before we continue, I am so excited to say that today's first ever video partner is NordVPN, and I actually have a confession about my Steam library that is mildly mortifying. Okay, so my Steam library is worth way more than I would like to admit. A decade of collecting, sales, bundles. I am essentially a digital hoarder, and here's the embarrassing part. Truly living up to my NPC name, I used to use the same passwords for everything. Steam, Epic, random forums from 2015, which is wild because if only one of those sites got hacked, which happens all the time, my passwords could have been served up on a silver platter and my games could have been gone overnight. A very scary thought. That's where NordVPN comes in. Their VPN encrypts my connection and hides my IP, but the feature I really love is Dark Web Monitor because it scans sites and alerts you if your credentials show up the moment something is breached, so I can change something immediately. One click and you are protected. If you would like to check it out, I have got an exclusive creator deal at nordvpn.com/TheBackgroundNPC. That's really cool to say. When you grab a 2-year plan through my link, you can get 4 extra months on top. Plus, they are offering a 30-day money-back guarantee to try it risk-free. Link is nordvpn.com/TheBackgroundNPC in the description below. All right, back to the video. We've talked about a few of these before, but Ghost of Yote. I know we're still waiting to see how this game nets out, but even just setting aside the controversy for a second, at its core, it is still a story about an angry woman on a revenge quest, which Sony has never done that before, right? And hey, we also could talk about Sony's pesky habit of replacing male-led franchises with female characters, but somehow we never see that behavior happening in reverse. I mean, could you imagine them replacing Aloy with Alan? That is never gonna happen, and that is probably a whole other video though. Moving on to The Last of Us Part 2, a game that divided its fan base and introduced us to Abby, the physical embodiment of the strong female lead, a character that Neil Druckmann defended the design of so fiercely that when he cast her in the live action, was sure to go with a cute, petite, and small-framed actress. Yikes. Speaking of buff ladies, Jen McKirkin and Zendara from Immortals of Avium. Now, these were 2 of the more prominent female characters in this game, with Zendara in particular pretty much following this blueprint to a T. The game cost over $125 million to make and was such a huge miss that EA had to lay off nearly half the studio. Of course, Forspoken and Star Wars Outlaws. Both female leads followed this template to a certain degree. Both lost their companies millions of dollars. Sarah Morgan was a main companion in Starfield. She was sometimes perceived as arrogant, judgmental, or preachy, and just overall, again, the characters in this game looked a bit freaky. Or Perfect Dark. The reboot was canceled this year after 7 years of development with pretty much nothing to show for it, and I am genuinely curious how they could go from the original character to what it was that we were seeing here. She kind of looks like she's about to start a neighborhood watch Facebook group and then just ban me from it. The point is, you start to recognize the blueprint each and every time, and sure, some of these games definitely had better gameplay and stories than others, which we will never know for Perfect Dark. RIP. But pattern recognition is still very much a thing, and so many of these studios forget that when you are focused on a more narrative approach, you also have to have a character that is going to resonate with your audience. So where is the widespread love for these female characters? All the cosplayers? Where is all the fan art or the edits? And here is the wild part. We can see this disinterest playing out in real time with games that are not even out yet, because once people recognize this pattern and the fact that it's not a good one, the effects hit before a game was even released. You probably already knew this one was coming, but Intergalactic, and our favorite bald protagonist. Neil Druckmann and Naughty Dog have made several statements as of late, reminding us all that this game exists and reminding me that everything I have learned about it has been against my will. But they are still full steam ahead, probably a 2027 release. But who can forget when they announced this game at the 2024 Game Awards and immediately had to turn the comments off? To this day, we have still only seen that one trailer with the insane like-to-dislike ratio. Or Fable. The protagonist reveal got, we will call it disappointment. They took a KVS approach where they had this beautiful actress and toned her down to be less offensive, I guess. The game got delayed and it has pretty much been crickets ever since. People are nervous before the game even releases at this point because they have been burned so many times, which means for studios who do actually get this right, not only do they get to shine all the brighter, but it makes this pattern so much more obvious. Looking at the flip side of things, this past year we were also introduced to Clair Obscur, which was a fantastic game with a majority female cast, Lune, Mael, and CL. Now, Sandfall had the option to follow the Western AAA girl boss pattern or just not do that. And what happened? Universal acclaim, 5 million copies sold, Game of the Year contender, they had instant fan art, cosplayers going wild, and just an overwhelmingly positive reception. So much so that the French president even congratulated them. Or Split Fiction with Mio and Zoe, two super cute female leads with completely different personalities that could be a bit quirky at times, but they ended up balancing each other out pretty well. Haze Light didn't just slap the full blueprint on both of them, but they made them distinct and fun to play. And for me, it actually wasn't quite as good as It Takes Two, but it was still a really solid game. Or Bai from Wu Chang Fallen Feathers, a game from a brand new Chinese developer, and I can promise you that any legitimate complaints you might have heard had nothing to do with the gorgeous female lead, who is incredibly graceful, elegant, and deadly. Now, you might be saying, well, NPC, but those games are out, so it is easy to praise the response to those characters. And that is true. But when you are looking at other upcoming games with female leads, Tides of Annihilation, Resident Evil 9, which we are already seeing cosplays for, The Witcher 4, especially since they may or may not have updated series design, we do see just more natural, organic hype. And that difference isn't random. Over the last few months, I have been getting messages here and there from people in the industry, and I recently talked with someone who has worked in Western AAA for over 15 years as a 3D artist. I cannot share their name since they are still actively working. It is a trust me bro situation, I recognize that, but they told me about being in these rooms for years, hearing feedback during female character development in particular, and that there are devs out there who feel a bit like hostages when it comes to what ideas and feedback that they are allowed to share without fear of being reported to HR or higher-ups if it goes somewhat against the grain. For female characters in particular, this person was often given direction like, we are not trying to sexualize women. reduce the hip width, make the chest smaller. That is reading too feminine, pull back. Specifically receiving direction that ultimately creates more androgynous looking characters and for the most part isn't coming from narrative reasons. Although it does kind of go hand in hand with that blueprint I mentioned earlier. No, it is being done to avoid offending anyone. Whether that's new female players they desperately want buying their games, or mostly the people working on the game itself. This gap that we're seeing, many times it is the result of very intentional design choices. Here's what kind of blows my mind about all of this though, every single time this argument is brought up. For decades, we have loved our female characters. Lara Croft was a cultural icon, Samus was revolutionary, Bayonetta was celebrated, Tifa, Jill, Zelda, all beloved, commercially successful, culturally significant. So, what changed? Because it wasn't the audience. Think about male protagonists. Kratos is nothing like Edward Kenway, Leon is completely different from Arthur Morgan, Cloud, Geralt, Jin, all very distinct, and I will argue, all attractive. Female characters used to have that exact same variety. Elena from Uncharted was funny and nurturing, 2B was graceful and deadly, Ellie from the Last of Us series. She falls more into the strong female lead category, but she is such a compelling and well-designed character that she is the exception that proves the rule. Even now, I will praise these characters again. Shadowheart, Karlach, Bazel, all from Baldur's Gate 3, have depth, warmth, and complexity. 15 million copies sold. Stellar Blade's Eve, gorgeous, lethal, and the devs stood their ground on her design. Over 3 million copies sold. And Halloween is upon us, so I have to mention, of course, Resident Evil Village, which sold over 10 million copies, making it the fastest selling title in the entire series to reach this milestone. That is the game that also featured Lady D and her daughters heavily in the marketing, so no, I do not think that that is just a coincidence. The point is, this argument is silly, because we already have tons of examples of beloved female characters that are all unique, compelling, hot, and you know who loves these characters enough to dress up like them year after year? Women. Aerith's actually one of my favorite female characters. She is such a girly girl and exists in a world that is industrial, dying, and cold. Everything around her is harsh and hopeless, and she just shows up in a beautiful pink dress and flowers, literally radiating warmth. She chooses kindness when cruelty would be easier, or to stay soft when the world demands everyone become hard. And those qualities are not a weakness that she has to overcome. They are her strength, and it is what makes her presence so unique and refreshing in that world. Now, of course, I am not saying that all female characters need to be like Aerith, but always stripping away those types of traits not only makes them boring and unappealing, it sends a message that warmth is weakness, compassion is naive, and the desire for beauty is inherently wrong. You have to be harder, bitter, angry, more masculine to be considered valuable, but by stripping femininity away, you are not making strong female characters, you are just making bad male characters with female bodies. The pattern's obvious, right? Strip away uniqueness, femininity, beauty, follow the template. Mixed reception at best. Let women actually be aspirational, beautiful, distinct, success. This makes me think of an article that I saw recently that read, "After years of progress on gender, the male gaze is back." So dumb. It's so ominous, and they announced it like Sauron just returned or something. Well, yes, of course, men like attractive women. Women like attractive women. That is not a scandal that needs fixing. That is just being human, and the whole male gaze critique falls apart pretty quickly when women are also the ones participating in the celebration, when we are the ones making the fan art, doing the cosplays, loving and hyping up all of these characters. Nobody is saying that every female character needs to be a supermodel. Not at all, but there is a huge difference between just natural variety and purposefully making your characters unattractive as a design philosophy. Creating an appealing and attractive female character is not a crime, so why do these studios keep acting like it is? Because they are creating for an audience that does not exist. They will point to surveys showing women make up almost half of gamers now, and for some reason they have convinced themselves that means creating even more female characters that are sure not to offend. But here is the thing, even if we take that data at face value, it is super misleading. A survey came out stating that women make up 48% of all gamers, but you are looking at all gamers across all platforms and genres, including people who claim that they play games at least 1 hour a week. Most of the women in my family play Wordle on their phones, so technically they are all gamers according to the survey. Win for me. But obviously that is not the case. When I was seriously crashing out last summer after dying to promised consort Radon for the 176th time, I wish that I were joking. Only 1 out of 9 of them was the same kind of gamer as me and was actually able to sit me down and give me respec advice. That is the type of difference we are talking about here. Any AAA studio that is seriously using this data in an effort to force in or justify dumb decisions is like a company using coffee shop customer data to design a sports bar. And the funny thing is, we never see this behavior happening in the other direction. I mentioned something similar in my Disney video, but when is the last time you saw a studio say, you know what our cozy farming game needs? Executions, or a dating sim where instead of choosing a boyfriend, you choose which faction to pledge allegiance to in the coming war. Never, because that would be insane. But somehow, it is not insane to do this in reverse. And that is what really frustrates me about all of this, because this conversation has become about men versus women in gaming, but it never should have been that. There should have always been a balance. Nobody had to lose for the other to win, and as someone who has a deep love and appreciation for our female characters, who has been inspired by them, motivated by them, I am tired of seeing the same thing play out over and over. Western AAA games with an uninspired female lead underperform, or there is just zero excitement surrounding them, and instead of any reflection, it turns into accusations. The audience is toxic, they can't handle strong women, they need to evolve. But that is not what is happening here. These studios continue to build games for audiences who are not showing up, designing a character for a demographic that, at large, is not playing their $70 game. So who are you making these for? Where are the women flocking to cosplay Atsu? Where are the people championing these characters? They're not here. But you know where they actually are? They are cosplaying Hornet. They are buying Claire Obscure. They are replaying Final Fantasy VII for the 100th time, and they are appreciating fan art of characters you dismissed as problematic. Team Cherry created a compelling female lead and one heck of a sequel. Hornet is elegant, has a memorable silhouette with that flowing red cloak. She moves with grace and precision and has one of the cutest voices I have ever heard. And she's a bug. An actual insect is showing Western AAA how it is done in more ways than one, and they didn't have to strip away her femininity to do it. They just designed her with intention and trusted that people would love her. She is getting more organic love than productions that cost multi-millions. So, to you studios out there, we want to love your characters. We do. And we will show up for games with great female characters. We always have. Just make them compelling, beautiful, and complex. Let them be warm and strong, soft and deadly, kind and capable. But to do this, you have to stop treating any trace of femininity and beauty like design flaws that need correcting, and you have to stop following this blueprint that keeps failing. It is time to stop building characters for an audience that does not exist and start building for us, the people who are actually here, waiting and ready to love your characters. Because right now in the big 2-5, the studios that show up for us are seeing massive wins, and that is something our industry desperately needs. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for being here. This one was kind of an ode to the video that started it all, and honestly, I do think that we are going to see a shift over the next couple years with this. The pattern is too obvious now, and the same thing goes for Hollywood too. Studios that create compelling, beautiful female characters will win. Studios that follow the girl boss blueprint will not. We just have to keep supporting the games that get it right, keep celebrating the characters that we love, and eventually, they will have no choice but to listen to us. So thanks again for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.